This week we are going to be looking at tidal charts, and we're going to be using them to identify the three different tidal patterns. So before we jump into the lab itself, I want to do a quick review of both of these. All right, here they are. We see three different tide charts, and each one has a different tidal pattern. So first let's look at the chart itself, and we're going to look at this chart over here. You'll notice on the y-axis you have tide height. And so this is showing you the change in sea level due to the tides. Higher tide and low tide as you go up and down. On the x-axis you have time, and the units are in hours. And you'll notice that it spans roughly 24 hours and then a little bit more, because these tides actually take a little bit more than 24 hours to do a full cycle. Now the squiggly line that is running up and down through these charts, this is representing those changes in sea level over that roughly 24-hour period. So as it goes down, that is the tide going out or going down. And as it goes back up, that's the tide coming in, that sea level temporarily rising. Okay, so we have our three different tidal patterns, and let's start with the one in the middle called a diurnal tidal pattern. Diurnal, by the way, is a fancy word for daily, and the diurnal tidal pattern is the simplest, but it's also the most rare. You have one high tide and one low tide per that roughly 24-hour period. Pretty simple. Now, depending where you are in the world, you might get a different tidal pattern, such as a semi-diurnal tidal pattern. And here you'll see you have two low tides within that roughly 24-hour periods and two high tides. Also note that the tide height is roughly the same for those low tides and high tides. Let's contrast that with mixed semi-diurnal. And you'll see again that we have two low tides and we also have two high tides, but they are not at the same height. What you end up with is a low tide and then a sort of low tide. Likewise, you have a high tide and then a sort of high tide. Okay, so like I said, depending on where you are in the world, you're going to have one of these tidal patterns. And that's what we are going to be looking at in this week's lab. So we are going to be using a website from NOAA that gives you the different tidal charts for any period of time, or pretty much anywhere in the world. So when you click through this link here, it's going to bring you to this map view, and this is for each of those problems. This is where you want to start. And this gives you access to data from a variety of different tidal charts. So let's start with someplace familiar. We're going to go to Astoria. And so I searched for Astoria, and then when I click on Astoria, it is going to drop me to this tidal chart in Astoria. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see where we are. Here's Oregon, here's Washington, and here is the pin that represents data for this location. So when you click on it, it gives you an overview. It tells you when the high and low tides are. It gives you the heights. It gives you the time. And with some of these stations, you can just click right here for plot data. And boom, you have a tidal chart showing you those different highs and lows. Okay, so on some of these, you're not going to be so lucky, and you are going to have to actually go click up here and click tide predictions in order to get access to that chart. Okay, and when you click through, here we are, and this is pretty much the same data that we saw, but now you can customize this and make this as many days or weeks as you want. So if we drop this back a few days and refresh. you can see that now we have the same data except over a span of multiple days. Okay, I want to go over one of the most common mistakes students make in this lab. Let's say we are presented with this tidal chart, and you're like, well, I got 2 high tides, 2 low tides. This must be some sort of semi-diurnal tidal pattern. But upon closer inspection, what you'll see is that this chart is spanning for 2 days, meaning that there's actually 1 high tide and 1 low tide per day. So this would be a diurnal pattern. Lesson here is make sure you're looking at this x-axis and making sure that you are paying attention to how much time is actually represented on that tidal chart. Okay, so as we go through the lab, you're going to be visiting this website repeatedly. Sometimes you are going to be prompted to go to certain locations and they give you the number of the station. This you're just going to paste into that box when you first click through. And remember, you want to start every problem right here. And you can put in a number right there as well. So there's our Astoria station, and it brings you right to the data. All right, and then in this next section, you are looking at 2 different tidal stations in Alaska. Here are their locations, and the tidal information is printed right here for you, and you're going to answer some questions on those. And then here you're going to be visiting different stations around the world and analyzing the tidal pattern. Finally, you're going to be looking at Oregon tides, and these are going to be a couple different stations along the Columbia River. And so you're going to be thinking about, why would a river have tides? Okay, and then finally, this section is not going to be using the NOAA website, but you are going to be looking at a couple videos about tides and why they're important for us to keep track of, and answering some questions about them. Okay, as always, feel free to reach out to me for any assistance, and good luck with your Tide Lab.